down at the inferior species, a Superman. Well, in America, there were two Jewish cartoonists, and they were looking to get a new comic strip going. The way, if I wanted to get a new comic strip going today, maybe I would do Nano World or something that would deal with what people are talking about. So they were going to do something about the Superman. But instead of seeing the Superman as a master race, they were a couple of Jews. So they could only see it through Jewish eyes. See? So Moses' mother saves him by putting him in a little basket and sending him downstream to be raised by the Gentiles. Just the way Superman's mother puts him into a little basket and shoots him off. Okay? And like the Jews of their day, they figured, well, the Superman would have to disguise the fact that he is a superior being and comes from a superior society that was destroyed, right? So he needs to take a name with which he can pass, right? Clark Kent. But he has his real name, right? And they knew that Jewish names, lots of them ended in L. Michael, Israel, right? Emmanuel. So his real name was Kael, and his father's name was Jor-El. Okay? And Jewish charity was always given, the best Jewish charity was given anonymously. Clark never got the credit for anything. He'd run into a phone booth, turn into his clothes, shoot out, save the day, come back, and then he was once again this meek person. And he worked, obviously, in a very Jewish profession. He was in the media, and there was this lovely shiksa who was running after him all the time. He was trying to avoid. So what happened was that two different cultures developed. A European culture of the Superman as a master race, and basically the American culture of the superhero, who's somebody who uses his strength and abilities to make the situation better, to help people. Okay, so here we have this ugly cartoon I did. Israel is the only country in the world where we have armed guards to shoot people to prevent them from committing suicide. Now, lots of people try to say, well, you shouldn't say it's a suicide bomber. You should say it's a homicide bomber. We tried to fight that. But the minute anybody sees this cartoon, they laugh. They laugh because it exposes the truth, which is that they're not committing suicide. So it gets in under the wire, and that's why it works. Here's Moses and God. God says, first, I have picked your nation to be my chosen people. Second, I will give you my laws and commandments for you to be a light unto the nations. And Moses says, and will this win us the love of the other nations? And God says, listen, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. Because we're so dopey that we thought that if we came to the world and said, hey, here's how you have to act. Here's the 10 commandments. Here's all the rules of morality. You can't just run around having fun. You got to, do good stuff. And we really thought the world would thank us. It shows the idea of Jews being smarter than other people is an anti-Semitic lie, which has caused us a lot of trouble. Okay, listen, kid, you're a victim. It's not fair, but you're a victim of the infidels, a victim of globalization, a victim of the Jews. But you can be something other than a victim. You can be a martyr. Okay? Now, you'll notice 2 things. One, at the top of the cartoon, there's a title, Back to School. Nobody reads that. Number 2 at the bottom, it says www.drybonesblog.com. Nobody reads that either. I have a blog, and it's at drybonesblog.com. So if you go there, you'll see we've got cartoons 5 days a week. Isabel pointed out that I appear in the Jerusalem Post. I also appear in Anglo-Jewish papers all over the place, and have been reprinted all over the place. But with the blog, I'm able to reach the world, which means I get emails from Egyptians, from Iraqis, from people in India, and therefore the outreach is much stronger and much broader. Islamic radicalism is a dissent-crushing cult. And someone says, what is Judaism? Judaism is an ongoing debating society. Here's a cartoon I did about Durban 2. We're coming up to, again, a rerun of Durban. In theory, a demonstration against racism, and in fact, an attack on America and Jews. There is this Rocky Horror movie show, you know, and in it there's a monster guy, and he does this dance, and he goes a step to the right, a step to the left, and he does this dance. And it occurred to me that they're always sort of dancing and stomping on our flags. So I showed how it's first a stomp to the right, then a stomp to the left, then coming soon, the Durban two-step, a dance as timeless as racism itself. I showed this cartoon to a group in Washington, and there I met a person who's been studying what's happening with Durban 2, and he says, interestingly, that this year they're going to focus much more on Europe, because Europe is close to in their clutches, so there's going to be much more about the Danes and the Brits and all like that. So I don't know if that's good for us. There's more company on the receiving line. The Western journalists in the Mideast have nothing to fear from the Islamo-fascists as long as they continue to bend over backwards to avoid offending them. So this is a little better than the chop off your head cartoon, but it's still not a big winner. I'll tell you another joke. You ready for a joke, right? Okay. So every time I slow down, if someone will just yell out joke, I'll tell you a joke. So this joke is the barber joke, right? This joke is about a barber, and he's sitting in his barber shop reading the Police Gazette or whatever, and he hears the bell jingle, the front door opens up, and in comes a Catholic priest. And the Catholic priest says, I'd like a haircut. And the barber says, sit down in the chair, sits down in the chair, puts the thing around him. The priest takes off his hat, gives him a haircut. The priest looks in the mirror and says, this is the best haircut I've ever had in my life. I look just absolutely stunning. This is amazing. How much do I owe you? And the barber says, Father, you're a man of God. You're in touch with the universe. I am not going to charge you anything. And the priest says, wow, that's very nice. And he goes out. Next day, the barber comes to open his shop in the morning, and there, on the doorsill, are lined up 12 silver coins. Wow, it's really great. Picks up his 12 silver coins and he goes in. He's sitting in the barber shop, and then ding ding, and the door opens up, and in comes a Buddhist monk. And the monk says, I'd like my head shaved. Barber says, fine, sit down. Lathers up his head, shaves his head. The Buddhist monk looks in the mirror. This is the best head shave I have ever had in my life. How much? And the barber says, you're in touch with the universe. You're a man of God. No charge. And the Buddhist monk says, wow, and he goes out. And the next day, the barber comes in, and lined up on the doorsill are 12 jade statuettes, beautiful little statuettes, and he gathers them up, and he goes in. Later that day, the doorbell rings, door opens up, and in comes a rabbi. The rabbi says, I'd like a haircut, and I'd like my beard trimmed. Barber says, fine. Cuts his hair, trims his beard. Rabbi looks in the mirror and says, I look astounding. This is the best haircut and beard trim I ever had. How much? And the barber says, Rabbi, you're a man of God. I will not charge you anything. The rabbi says, that's fantastic. He goes out. And in the morning, the barber comes to work. And there, lined up on his doorsill, are 12 rabbis. That is an anti-Semitic joke. Because if I told you that the rabbi left 12 silver coins, and then in the morning there were like 12 Buddhists lined up, you would look at me and say, what's funny about that? Right? Because the joke works because it activates that little piece of anti-Semitism which is in your mind, that Jews are cheap, and therefore the joke works. This is why the Nazis used cartoons and why they used jokes. It's a way of getting into people's heads. Here's a cartoon I did about Condoleezza Rice. She had said that she really felt for the people in Gaza because she too grew up in a society which discriminated against her. Not realizing, I guess, that she's taking a Ku Klux Klan position. She thinks that the place will be better if a particular group is banned from living there. Okay? So the KKK guy says, no Jews or blacks allowed, and she says, no Jews allowed. Well, first of all, the Klan would never have used the word blacks. Right? So to be accurate, and when I first did the cartoon, I used the polite Southernism of Negroes. Right? But the minute I put it in, I realized that that would immediately be looked at by people as if I was racist. So I had to go along with making it acceptable to the modern eye. Here we've got no Jews or blacks, and she says no Jews. That was the Deep South. This is the West Bank. And that's that cartoon. Back to this cartoon, which rightly so, camera rejected. Because they said this is not going to, well, guess what they thought? They didn't say the people at camera are much too nice. They didn't say this is an ugly cartoon. They didn't say this is an offensive cartoon. They said, gee, you do so many cartoons that make people laugh. Can't you come up with something that's, you know, sort of jolly? So I came up with that jolly cartoon about he can't come to the phone because he's shouting at the TV. So recently I was sent a photograph. Nowadays everybody's got the phones that they can just take a picture. And in Jerusalem, every foreign journalist who comes to Israel and who wants to cover the story, whether they are from the New York Times or from CBS, whoever they are, when they come to Israel, they have to receive accreditation. They have to get their credentials as a journalist. And to get their credentials, they go to Beit Agro. It's a building in Jerusalem which houses the government press office, the official press office, and every journalist has to go there. And I was sent a photograph of the front door of the government press office. They went and stuck up my cartoon on the door because they figured that these journalists who came in should know that we know that you're threatened. They didn't have any trouble with the ugliness of the cartoon. It just made them feel good to put it up on the door. I did this cartoon when Menachem Begin became prime minister. Okay? He became prime minister right after Jimmy Carter became president.
Right.
Oh, he's right. So and Carter was yelling about withdrawal from occupied territories, and he demanded that Begin go and see him 2 weeks after Begin became prime minister. And I did this cartoon. What we have is Prime Minister Begin showing the map of the United States and the occupied territories as of 1977. Then we have U.S. disengagement from territories seized in 1848 from Mexico. And then we have the pullback from the Northwest Bank, right, whereby zealots chanting manifest destiny. Then we have the withdrawal from the Texas annexation. See, what I did was, the American Information Service has a library, the USIS library in Jerusalem. So I went there and I said, gee, you have any books on the Louisiana Purchase? And they said, sure. Nobody's ever asked for this book before. So they bring me the book and I get the maps, and they say, you have anything about the admission of Texas to... And they say, yeah, and they brought it over. And then the librarian stood there and said, you're going to attack us, right? So then it goes to the return of the Florida territories. And back then, falling back from Louisiana to what Jefferson described as enough territory to satisfy America's expanding population for 100, perhaps 1,000 generations. Then we go to evacuation of the illegal settlements, which were west of the 1763 partition lines. And then after its final withdrawal to a state smaller than its name, America will be in a position to negotiate the question of its right to exist. All Americans whose family arrived before 1776 feel like, okay, so I did this cartoon. And to my horror, the day after the cartoon appeared in the Jerusalem Post, I got a phone call from Prime Minister Begin's office. They really liked the cartoon. And they liked the cartoon so much that they thought at the meeting with the new President Carter, they should show it to him. You see over here this blue writing? To dry bones. This would make my job much easier. Jimmy Carter, right? He had to display the idea that he was really fair-minded and a good sport. So if you wonder why, for all these years, Jimmy Carter has hated us so much, could be, who knows? I mean, I might be the person responsible. It could be my fault. By the way, when Begin was, I can't say elected because we don't elect the guy, we vote for the party. And in Israel, the idea of democracy is that we vote for the party, but we don't want to put the party's name there, right? Because that would be, I don't know. So you call one party A and one party B. So if you want to vote for Begin, you got to figure you vote for party A, which is Beirut or whatever. But then, that's an Israeli idea. But then the Israelis are also running the political parties, right? So you take the party that has A and a party that has M, and you take a party that has T, and you combine them. And now you have the word emet, which means truth. Right? So all the parties have figured out how to get letters that spell out a word since they're not allowed to use a word. Okay, so Begin becomes prime minister. And Time magazine thought it was really important that people not mispronounce Begin's name. So in the story about Menachem Begin that they did, they had a little box that said, Begin rhymes with Fagin. So I did a cartoon the next day that said, Time rhymes with grime and slime. Now, there was a guy named David Rubinger. David Rubinger is Israel's greatest photographer. Any great photograph you've seen out of Israel was done by David Rubinger. You know, the paratrooper at the Western Wall looking up, Rabin coming out of the Olds. Every great photograph was taken by David Rubinger. And he was the photographer of the Jerusalem Post, and he was also the photographer of Time magazine. So I waddle into the Jerusalem Post one day, and Rubinger comes to me and says, Yaakov, I have a message for you from Time magazine. Until then, all the messages I got from Time magazine came once a week, mailed to me in their magazine, but now I had like a direct message. And David said, they told me to tell you precisely. So I said, okay, what's the message? He said, the message is, I'm supposed to tell that son of a bitch, if he ever thought he would get into Time magazine, he could forget it now. Which gave me, like, mixed emotions, you know, like seeing your mother-in-law drive off a cliff in your new car. So I thought, okay, so be it. You know. And so the years went on, and I did my stuff, and Time magazine did its stuff. And one day, years later, a guy named Bob Slater called me up. Bob Slater was the local Time magazine guy. And he called me up and he said, listen, Dry Bones is unique. Okay? The reason he thought it was unique, see, I was doing an editorial cartoon, but I was doing it in a comic strip form. Right? Nobody had ever done that. Right? I am known to American cartoonists as the idiots who did it before Doonesbury in the wrong place in some little shit. But so be it. So,
You're much better.
well, you think so. It's like I'm very famous to a very few people. So there I am, and I get this call from Bob Slater, and he says, Dry Bones is unique. It's not only unique in Israel, it's not only unique in the Middle East, it's unique in the world. And we have a page in Time magazine about media, and I'd like to interview you and maybe do a piece about Dry Bones. I thought, well, gee, that's really nice. And he made arrangements to meet me at a bar in Jerusalem. At that time, we had 3 bars in all of Jerusalem. Now, because of the Russian immigration, we got bars all over. Back then, there were 3 bars, and one of them was right near the King David Hotel, and it was called Goliath's. And they had a sign in the window, Goliath, just a stone's throw from the So I was about to leave the house, and I was married to a lovely lady who I'd been married to for 12 years. Thank God now I'm no longer married to her. But at that point, I'm walking out of the house. You know, it's really depressing when you live with somebody for 12 years and they think so little of you that as I walk out the door, she actually said to me, "Don't mention time grind slime." I felt like, you know, what does this woman think of me? So I go down to the Goliath bar, and back then we drank Black Russians. We don't have that anymore, right? It was like vodka and Kahlua, right? And at the Goliath's bar, they had these big goblets of Black Russians. And they did little sandwiches. See, they would take a sandwich and they would cut the crust off on all sides so you get a little sandwich. So I was having little sandwiches and big Black Russians. And Bob Slater had a yellow legal pad. And he's asking me questions. And he's writing down and I'm telling him. And he said, "Wonderful, wonderful." He's writing and writing. He asked me another question. I give it, "Fabulous." And finishes pages and pages, and I'm knocking down these drinks, and he's writing, and I'm drinking. And he finishes, and he says, "Yaakov, I don't think this is a piece for the media page. I think this is a cover story for Time magazine. And I'm going to send it to them with the recommendation we do cover story, and I can't guarantee it, but this is really wonderful stuff." And I said, "That's great." And he said, "Listen, I'm going to tell you something." He says, "In my office at Time magazine, I have this big wooden desk. And you know, on the right-hand side of the desk, over the little drawer, you can pull out this flat panel, you know, that nobody knows what to do with." He said, "I have a cartoon of yours taped to this panel. Nobody at Time magazine knows that I have this cartoon. And every now and then I pull it out and look at it and have a laugh." And I said, "Time grind slide." And he said, "No." He said, "That was real. I had forgotten about that. You slandered our organization." "Well, I'll be going now." And he said it was really an awful thing to do. And I went home, and I came in the house, and my then wife said, "What happened?" And I said, "I mentioned time grind slime." And she said, "I knew you would." So there we are.
So,
What's the question? Did they do a story? Of course not.
no, what was the cartoon you were looking at?
I never found out what the damn cartoon man stopped talking to me. Here's a piece in the paper about Joe Biden works to assure Jewish activists of Barack Obama's pro-Israel stance. Why am I showing you this?
I looked at the brush.
Appearing before leading Jewish Democratic activists here Tuesday night, Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Joe Biden began by recalling an incident involving the Yeshiva University rowing team. The team, for some reason, was always getting caught on the spot. So the YU coach sent a rower to spy on Harvard to learn their trick. As soon as he caught a glimpse of his rival's practice, he called his coach with the answer. The secret is they've got 8 guys rowing and only 1 yelling. Biden related to laughter from the audience at the National Jewish Democratic Council. And okay. All right. So Joe Biden stole my joke. This is okay. The problem is, it's now no longer a joke. he had now related an incident involving the Yeshiva University rowing team. And the dopey Jews who were listening to him laughed at this anti-Semitic joke. So there we are. So cartoons and jokes get a life of their own. So somebody's running around telling my Olmert joke about Bush, and here's Joe Biden telling my Rowan joke as an actual event. You know, we can't tell what's going to happen in the future. And because of that, I fantasized about some scientists back in the 50s wanting to get information about the future. So they sent a time traveler from 1958 to the future. Has he come back with stock market info? Yes, he's come back. But unfortunately, the trip to 2008 scrambled his mind. Stock tips. Nothing but gibberish. The guy comes back and says, Yahoo, Google, Yahoo. Which is just another way of saying we don't know how we are going to be understood. Just the way my poor grandmother who went to see Ethel was communicating to me that she was flying to the West Coast. So now I have a blog, right? And on the blog, I'm reaching all kinds of people. And here, this is about talking to a kid. The kid says, there are new phones that are fantastic. They don't have any buttons, Mr. Schulman says. I remember when phones were fantastic because they did have buttons. You know, instead of a dial, the kid says, dial? I have a friend who collects jazz records, right? So he's got all these LPs and he's got a record player and stuff. True story, not a joke. He comes home one day and his daughter says, well, I hesitate because I should say dad. She said Abba, which is daddy in Hebrew. And she said, Abba, while you were gone, I played a record for my friends. And he said, gee, that's nice. And she said, but we had some trouble. And he said, what was the trouble? She said, well, I had the record jacket, and we listened to side A, but I couldn't find a button to play side B. So he said, you take the record and you turn it over. And she said, oh, Abba. Because she couldn't conceive that you had to turn the record over. There obviously had to be a button. Here at the bottom of the blog, here's comments. So now what's happening is I do a cartoon and I can explain about the cartoon. And at the bottom, people can write in, which is really interesting because it's really different from being in a newspaper. There's another difference. When you're in a newspaper, they pay you. Online, you pay to do it. So rather than this problem is very interesting. So years go on the blog, I have 5 cartoons a week. You go to drybonesblog.com. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I have brand new cartoons. And Tuesday and Thursday, I have golden oldies. And I run cartoons from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So one day, Hamas comes to power in Gaza. And all of the journalists who've been covering the story of Palestinian moderation suddenly don't understand. How could this be? They were totally thrown for a loop. So here we have CNN, the situation online, and to explain how Hamas came to power, they found on my website, I did a cartoon, the first 2 boxes, the Palestinians who are throwing the rocks and fireballs are too young to vote. And this cartoon was done 18 years ago. Now they're old enough to vote. So the guys who were throwing the Molotov cocktails have now voted. And CNN was able to see through that cartoon what the reality was. So what I'm trying to do with the cartoons is to explain reality, to explain the truth in a situation when we're facing lies. Okay? So other people, other than Jews, we would say, you know what? They're lying about us. So what we have to do is to make an organization to lie about them. But we're Jews. We don't want to lie about them. What we want is simply a fair shot. We simply want them to tell the truth. So camera does not go around making up lies for us in order to counter the lies against us. Camera says, just be fair. And I think that in a very basic way, Camera is not a Jewish organization. Camera is an organization that defends democracy. And Camera is, I think, the beginning of something that will spread. I think just the way that labor unions were able to counterbalance the hubris and I can do anything because I own the factory, just because somebody owns the newspapers and owns the television shows, they've got to know that there is a counterbalance. And that counterbalance is camera. Time for a joke. I'll tell you a joke that Joe Biden can't steal. See? Excuse me?
I said that's a joke by itself.
That's it. I have a hard time telling this joke because my then wife said it was offensive. So every time I tell the joke, I see her. Right around here. It's like, oh no, you're not going to tell this. So the thing is that comedians used to have discussions about where do the jokes you hear in the street come from? You know, does somebody sit down and write a joke and then start telling people and it just goes around in the street? Well, where do they come from? So I decided that I would write a joke and I would tell the joke whenever I spoke to groups and see if it ever got back to me. So I wrote something called the camel joke, which I'll tell you. And she says I should, but I began telling this joke. And after a while, I don't know, it must have been maybe 2 years, someone told me my joke, which is wonderful. I had proven something at least, and here was a joke that I wrote, and it was now a street joke. But being Jewish, I didn't know when to stop, so I continued telling the joke, and then people would say, you didn't tell that joke right. I've done something bad, right? Something's getting fixed. I hope it's not me. He's in my pocket now. I just came from West Hollywood. So. All right. So I wrote the camel joke, and people started saying it wasn't right. Then somebody got up and said, I read that joke in Leo Rosten's Joys of Yiddish, published in 1942. I wrote the joke. All right. So the joke is about someone like me. The joke is about a guy who makes Aliyah to Israel. A guy who wants to return to his ancient ancestral Semitic homeland. So he moves to Israel. And unfortunately, he lives in a bedroom community just north of Tel Aviv, and every day he goes into Tel Aviv and he works in a high-rise building. Anybody hear this joke, by the way? Hasn't made it yet? So you're not going to criticize the way I tell it. So he works every day in this high-rise building at the computer, and he comes down, he goes home. Just doesn't feel like his ancient Semitic biblical homeland. So he goes and buys a camel. And he has the camel in front of his house. And he gets up in the morning and he gets on the camel and he rides into work. Ties up the camel, goes into the building, takes the elevator up, sits all day, works at the computer, comes down, unties the camel, gets on the camel, rides up. Second day, gets up, gets on the camel, rides to work, up to types. Comes down, gets on the camel, goes home. Third day, he comes out, gets on his camel, rides on the highway to work, goes in, goes up, types all day on his computer, comes down, gets on the camel, goes home. Fourth day, he gets up, comes out, the camel is gone. Someone has stolen his camel. So he goes to the police station. Says, I want to report a stolen camel. Cop says, fine. Sit down. Cop takes out the stolen camel forms. Says to him, this camel that was stolen, was this a brown camel or a gray camel? He said, well, it was camel colored, sort of a brownish gray. I didn't know that there were gray camels and brown camels. You would show me a picture of a brown camel and a picture of a gray camel, I could tell you which it is. Cop writes down, color unknown. She's getting louder over here.
And you learn.
Yeah. The cop says, did this camel have one hump or two humps? He said, look, I had it for 3 days. It had a big blanket. And on the blanket was a saddle. 3 days, I never had the camel washed. I don't know if the saddle was on top of one hump or in between two humps. Cop writes down, number of humps unknown. Camel says, cop says, was this a male camel or a female camel? He says, it was a male camel. Cop says, you sure? He says, of course I'm sure. Cop says, you didn't know what color this camel was. You didn't know how many humps this camel had. How could you be so sure it was a male camel? And he says, well, every day when I was riding to work on the highway, all of the Israelis would lean out of their cars as they went by saying, look at the big schmuck on that camel. I don't think Joe Biden is going to... That's an inside joke? Well, it's a joke that describes the relationships between Israelis and people who choose to actually go there and live amongst them. Are there any questions at this point? Yes.
How did you get to the name?
Oh my God. She's going to ask the question. When I first did Dry Bones, and I sold it, got it into the Jerusalem Post, they said, what are you going to call this? So I said, Kirshen's Corner, both spelled with K. And I thought I had to come up with a name that everybody would understand. Now, 2,600 years ago, a Jew living in Babylon, who had been carried off, a guy named Ezekiel, had a vision in which he was shown the future. And he was shown in great detail about how when the world thought it had destroyed us, we would come together and we would come back to the homeland and we would plant trees where there were no trees and we'd build up cities. And he didn't get into the details about what Egged buses are like and what our prime ministers are like. And therefore, dry bones would just sort of fill in the missing stuff. And in the 35 years since then, I have never given a speech without somebody says, well, why'd you get that name? Which immediately shows me that the very first step was a total failure. And I used to try to remind myself to start by saying this is why it's called dry bones, so I don't suffer the embarrassment of somebody actually asking. By the way, I pointed out that this guy is Mr. Schuldig. See? This guy here, Mr. Schuldig. He's called Mr. Schuldig because when I came to Israel, I discovered that in the Jerusalem Post, once a week, once every 2 weeks, there would be a letter from somebody complaining about our bus system, which is run, we have buses that are run by a cooperative called Egged. And people would write in letters like, the Egged bus driver closed the door on my leg and dragged me for 3 blocks. And then it would say, Egged spokesman M. Schiffman replies. And his reply always was, the owner-operators of Egged buses stand in the forefront of protecting the country. And he would go on and rave about, he would never take the blame for anything. So I decided what was needed was a character who would accept blame, something unique in Israeli society. So instead of M. Schiffman, I thought this guy would be M. Schuldig. Schuldig is Yiddish for blame. Ich bin schuldig means, it's me, I did it, I'm the guilty one. So the first time I sat down to draw Mr. Schuldig, I figured him out. He's got 3 mustache hairs on one side, 4 on the other. He's got eyes that cross and like that. And so I sat down to do the first cartoon in which Mr. Schuldig would take blame for something. But something really weird happened. When I went to do the first cartoon, something different came out. See, we have socialized medicine, and that means we have clinics. So in the morning, if you're sick, you go to the clinic. And you have to get a number. And the clinics open at 8 o'clock in the morning. But since school opens at 8 o'clock in the morning, there's all kinds of people who get to the clinic before the doors open. Which means that as soon as the doors open, all these people rush in demanding a number, and it's chaotic. So Mr. Schuldig came out and said that what's needed is to give out numbers for the number line. So 2 things. Number 1, Mr. Schuldig has never taken blame for anything in the 35 years since his appearance. The second interesting thing is that later that week, I got a call from the Jerusalem Kupat Cholim, the Jerusalem clinic, in which they said that they had instituted a suggestion. And that now people got numbers for the number line. I also, by the way, one day there was a lot of discussion about what was going to happen with the sign-up, okay, and what to do with the Sinai. We had invaded out. So I came up with a plan. It was I don't have the cartoon here, but the cartoon was called Sink It Now. The concept was to dig a canal from a lot in the south all the way up past Beersheba and up to the Mediterranean, and then to drill 3 holes in the center of Sinai and sink the whole thing. And that would make Beersheba a deep water port, and Egypt and Israel would be separated by miles of water. Okay. So a few days later, I get a call from Major Brown of the UN. He's stationed in the UN map room. And he wants to come to the Jerusalem Post and get the original of the cartoon. So I say, gee, that's nice. Come on over, I'll give it to you. So he comes over and I show him the map and he says, oh, lovely. And I say, what are you going to do with the map? And he says, I'm going to put it in the map room. I said, what do you mean the map room? He says, well, the UN has a room where we have all of the maps about the suggested solutions for the Sinai. And I said, you're going to put my map about drilling holes in the Sinai and sinking it? Don't you think it's a little weird? And he said, you should see some of the maps we have. Over the years, I've done a number of plans. In Israel, we have military censorship. And military censorship means that there are certain stories that you are not allowed to put in the newspaper. The Yom Kippur War, when the Egyptians poured over the canal and they grabbed Israeli units and took Israeli prisoners, a number of those prisoners were Israeli Arabs. There were a lot of Bedouin Arabs who were, at that point, doing their reserve duty on the canal, and they had been grabbed. And obviously, they were not speaking Arabic while they were sitting in an Egyptian prison. Because had the Egyptians known that these were not only Israeli prisoners, but Muslim Israeli prisoners, they would have been in trouble. So, the censor did not allow any mention of non-Jews in the army for a period of time. So at one point, Israel was involved in some kind of negotiations with China. And we didn't know what was going on, but there was an Israeli delegation that had gone to China and come back and said hush hush. And it turned out that the military censor was censoring stories about China. So I was thinking, what could it be? And I calculated how many Chinese there were, and therefore how many porcelain spoons they had to have in order to drink their soup, and how many chopsticks they had to eat their food. And I realized that the breakage and replacement of billions of ceramic spoons, if somehow that could be saved, that would be a lot of money. So my idea was, it was called hollow chopsticks. See, I did a page about how every Israeli family, I worked out how many thousands of chopsticks we'd have to get. Each family would drill holes through the chopsticks. And that way they could eat their food and then drink their soup right through the chopsticks. some putz at the Jerusalem Post sends it to the censor for clearing. And the censor bars it and says you can't print this. So I'm outraged. And I go to the government censorship office. And I say, this is censored? And he says, yes. And I said, you know, towards the end of World War II, there were science fiction writers who wrote about atomic bombs. And they just stumbled upon it just by dumb luck. Could it be that by dumb luck, I have actually stumbled onto the truth? Am I and my wife going to get bundles of chopsticks to drill holes through? And the officer said, could be, I don't know. He says, it sounds like a good idea. I just know I'm not allowed to let that out. A question?
Yeah, what kind of feedback do you get from the Arab readers? And I mean, international, I'm not Israeli Arabs, but international.
Interesting. Well, first of all, there's a community of bloggers. If I'm sitting and writing a blog, there are Egyptians sitting and writing blogs. Okay? Now, if you're an Egyptian, it's a dangerous thing to do. But you know what? You can get online and you can get a Yahoo email address. Okay? And then with your Yahoo email address, you can start a blog. So nobody knows who you are. So one day, there is a terrorist attack in Khadera. And I get an email from an Egyptian blogger. Okay, because he's been reading the Dry Bones blog. And he trusts me. So he writes me an email saying that there's just been this terrorist attack. And he wants to know the truth about it. Because obviously he's reading it about it in the Egyptian press. But he now can get past the lies of the Egyptian press because he's got an Israeli he trusts. So he writes to me and says, tell me what really happened. So I went and found an English language story in the press that I felt was totally accurate. And I sent it to him and I said, this is the real story. And then he writes back to me and he says, I don't understand how an Arab was able to get into a Jewish marketplace. So I had to write back to him to say, we don't prevent Arabs. There's a democracy. Arabs go wherever they want. And we had this exchange in which he was learning about what Israeli society was. I get letters from Lebanon, from Iraq. I got a letter from a medical student in India saying that they had never taught him anything about the Middle East in university. And so he only knows the story as it is in the newspapers. And that he thanked me for having the blog because now he could see reality.
How about the newspapers, though? Did the Arab newspapers carry it at all?
Do Arab newspapers carry dry bones?
I
I have Jewish newspapers that have dropped dry bones because I'm too right-wing. Yes.
You don't see dry bones in the Jewish Journal.
Anti-Jewish
Sometimes.
Do you have a lot of
What?
I call the anti-Jewish journal.
Oh, the anti-Jewish journal.
Wait, yeah.
Right. So Jewish journals dropped it. I was in 43 Anglo-Jewish papers, and the number dropped to about 20, and now it's back up to about 35. And the problem is, there are people who don't want to hear Truth.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of cartoons that you have not published for various reasons?
No, I don't have any cartoons that I haven't published before. I mean, I write them. The way I got into the Jerusalem Post is an interesting story, but maybe we're going too long. I don't know. Yes?
When you're dropped in a Jewish journal.
Yeah.
What they say.
What they say? They said, we're not carrying you anymore.
No.
Period. What else are they going to say? Right?
Maybe you should take 2 more sessions.
Hold on. Isabella's saying I should do something different. Maybe I should
I was
stop.
just saying maybe a couple more questions.
A couple more questions and then make them go home. Why don't you go? We'll stay here. Okay. I think as long as they've got questions, I'll answer them. Let me give you a final cartoon here, and then we'll continue with the questions. Let's go past all this stuff we saw. Joe. Okay. We started by talking about superheroes. Here's another cartoon I did for camera that they rejected. Superheroes. The public needs accurate and balanced coverage of Israel and the Middle East. There's a job for a legion of superheroes. Mr. Schuldick says, we have a legion of superheroes, the folks who support camera. The bottom says, become a superhero, support camera. So the people at camera said, we can't say that we're superheroes. It's like blowing our own horn and like that. So this cartoon has not been approved by camera. However, I figure if you really want to be a superhero, if you want to do something that's really going to change things, if you want to get out there and fight for truth, justice, democracy, and honesty, there's no better way than by supporting camera. So I hope that you'll do that. A last couple of questions, or do we say goodbye? Yes.
So what was the story with China? When
Who knows? I never got chopsticks. And eventually, whatever happens, I don't know.
Why is it called dry bones?
Why is it called dry bones? Oh my God!
Where were you?
2 slaps in one event. The book of Ezekiel, vision of dry bones. Look, next time you're in a hotel, you'll open the drawer, take out the Gideon's article, and you'll turn to Ezekiel 37, and you'll see that he described everything that we're living through now.
So these dry bones profit.
Hazon and Sabote.
Hazon Atzamote of the show. Yes, question.
I'm curious about your background as a cartoonist and what made you go in that direction.
Okay, my background as a cartoonist, I was a cartoonist for Playboy magazine. And back in the day when they paid a lot of money and they had the best cartoons in the world, and I moved to Israel, and interestingly, I earned exactly the same amount at the Jerusalem Post that I did at Playboy. Except that at Playboy it was for 1 cartoon, and the Jerusalem Post it was for a month's worth. But the amount was exactly the same. Maybe on that happy note, we should call it an evening. And just remember that you can be a superhero, and that the whole superhero... Yeah, don't make her stop. She has a question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Do you have a book of your cartoons?
Do I have a book?
Yeah.
The complete works of
The complete works. Not really. What you got to do now, I guess I should do one. But right now, what you should do is you should get online and go to drybonesblog.com, and you'll be able to see years of cartoons and follow what's happening.
Now,
One last question? Great. I exhausted your question. Thank you so much.